Welcome, everybody. We lost our return here. I hope you're hearing us, but we are very excited today. Our guest is Dr. Mark McDonald. He is a psychiatrist, and he's had some training in psychoanalysis as well, I've found. And he is as I said, board-certified child adolescent psychiatrist, specializes in the treatment of young people, mental illness, also serves adults and couples as well as families. And he wrote a first book that I believe we spoke about here once before called The United States of Fear. And his new book is Freedom from Fear, a 12-step personal guide and national recovery. It is available at dissidentmd.com. You can also read his post at markmcdonaldmd.substack.com. And sort of the topic of the day is that President Biden has declared the pandemic over, and yet millions seem to be clinging to the anxieties surrounding COVID-19 and towards the signals associated with the rituals around this particular pandemic. And we're going to talk about that and the notion of mass formation psychosis, and maybe a little time for your calls as well. Let's get going.
Our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say.
My natural instinct was just to say, calm down, everybody. It's never the case that panic makes things better. And it was very clear to me that somebody was stirring up a level of panic that I had never seen before on a large scale, on a societal scale, I'd never seen before in my lifetime. And I thought it was the press at the time. I'm learning it's more than just the press. And that's why I kept screaming at the press to shut up, because they had no business even having a place at the table with an opinion about how the medical community should be dealing with the pandemic. But that was not to be. And we all know what did happen. And now we're just trying to make sense of it. And hopefully Dr. McDonald can be part of those answers for me. Again, Dr. McDonald is a board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist. You can find his work at Mark McDonald with an MC, Donald MD, markmcdonaldmd.substack.com, and dissidentmd.com is where you can get the book. And the book is Freedom from Fear. Welcome, Dr. McDonald.
Hello, and dzień dobry to my Polish listeners. I have a large following in Poland.
Oh, how interesting. Well, bonjour to les Français aussi. Hopefully they are more than welcome here. Everybody's welcome. So,
hola, mi amigos en Mexico.
Right, and Susan has her own fans. So let's start with the book. Tell us what the book is, why we should get it, why we should read it, and then we'll go on to other stuff. Let's just get that up front.
Sure. So I wrote the book Freedom from Fear, a 12-step guide to individual and national recovery. It came out just a few weeks ago as a follow-up to my first book, which was called and is called United States of Fear, How America Fell Victim to Mass Delusional Psychosis. And I wrote this book really in response to questions I've been getting since the publication of the first book, which is not how did our country fall into mass delusional psychosis, but rather, what do I do about it? What do I do about it for my family, for my friends? I'm afraid, my friends are afraid, we're obsessed with this, we're addicted to this fear, and I don't know how to overcome it. So this is the answer to that question. And I answered it in a format that I felt would be very viable and receptive to an audience like my Los Angeles audience, which is very comfortable and familiar with the recovery process, with AA, with 12-step. And so I modeled it after the 12-step program, and with a little bit of flavor from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. It's a 12-step guide, starting with the obvious, which is admit that you actually have an addiction, and then move through the steps. And hopefully, individual Americans will see this, read it, give it to their friends and family, and then, as opposed to a top-down approach to solve our country's problems from Washington, a bottom-up approach, solving them in the home, in the community, in the county, in the state, working our way up and using that individual mental health improvement as a way to heal our nation.
Do you offer, in addition to the individual 12-step process, do you offer sort of inspiration for helping others around or contribute to a community recovery?
Absolutely. In fact, the last step, which is be a mentor to others, I think is the most important one, but also the hardest. Because in order to do that, you have to have actually mastered your own problems. Not conquered them, but at least mastered them. And when you do that, then you can start to engage with your local community and bring them into the fold. Because really, courage is contagious. And we don't have enough courage today. My big complaint in the last 3 years is that good people have failed to display courage, have failed to take risks. And that has allowed, as the old phrase goes, evil conquers when the good do nothing. And I think that's what's happened.
Yeah, it has been, well, it's been hard to be courageous because it's been one of these uncertain, unclear situations. Still a lot of uncertainty what's happening, which is, of course, even probably a louder cry for courage when things are not clear.
I would agree with that. I think that, largely speaking, as a psychiatrist, I've been talking not about medicine per se, but about mental health, about emotion, and specifically about fear. And when people are afraid, when people are chronically afraid, they lose their ability to think critically. They lose their ability to see through the vagaries, the nuances, the gray, and they fall prey to powerful figures who order them around, who give them mandates, who tell them what to do, and they wind up not thinking on their own behalf. And this is a big problem because there are a lot of predators in our midst. Corporate predators, media predators, political predators, and they take advantage of that fear, and they give guidance and advice that, in my view, is not actually serving the people. It's very self-serving. And a lot of people have harmed themselves terribly. A few examples, obviously, are children, the most recent. 2 years of lost education, 2 years of lost speech development, suicides, as you are very familiar with, and as am I, enormous exponential increases in drug addiction and overdose. I've worked for 12 years as a private psychiatrist. I lost 2 patients for the first time in my career, both to fentanyl, both in 2021.
Yeah, it was the other thing that I find astonishing about the present moment is, based on the decisions and the non-pharmacological interventions that were foisted upon the public, it was highly predictable this would happen. This is not a mystery how this happened. I don't know about you, but I saw the train coming our way. I saw it the moment the New York Times editorial board demanded a lockdown. That was one of the lines for me where I was like, what? Why do they have an opinion about this? Where did this notion of lockdown come from? And why do these non-medical people have an opinion? And they know not what they do. This will have horrible consequences.
In June of 2020, I said this out loud on the Supreme Court steps in Washington, D.C., and I said, we, the adults, are afraid. We are sacrificing our children for our own anxiety by closing schools. And this is the biggest mistake that we have made so far in the response to this pandemic. That was over 2 years ago. That speech was taken down, censored, removed from all social media within 8 hours. That was 2 years ago. So this New York Times apologia that came out just a few weeks ago with this sort of, gosh, who knew that we would have a complete generational disaster with young people? Who saw
Oh my God, who knew?
I saw it coming. We all the thinking people saw this coming. So this shrug, like, gosh, I don't know what would have happened, makes me so angry because it was visible, it was apparent, and we were talking about it, and we were silenced.
Yeah. And to be fair, I understand, we Dr. McDonald, I understand this was a very dangerous situation. Hundreds of thousands of people were going to die. But the question was, what could you do about that without causing hundreds of thousands of more deaths and hundreds and thousands, maybe millions more disability and trashed lives? That was the question at the time. And to just look at one policy, COVID overall, COVID, I like to say uber alles, safety uber alles, one death is too many, that silenced any conversation that we might have had that could have avoided all these horrible outcomes that we are still just muddling our way through. There's going to be more.
Remember what Cuomo said famously in the very beginning. He said, if all of the lockdowns, shutdowns, closures, mask requirements, et cetera, if all of them saved just one life, this would be worth it. That is an evil, destructive, irresponsible statement. We could save thousands of lives by preventing people from crossing the street, by removing automobiles. But that's absurd. No one would even consider that. The idea that this one variable analysis of doing one thing is the only thing we need to consider was an enormous, grave error.
Enormous, and it's starting to come into focus for me what happened. So I want to, before I get on to that, I want to back up again to the free-floating anxiety and the fear, and the what has been called mass formation. Do you adhere? Is that a construct that you find useful? The mass formation, and I think you and I talked about the level of distortions of thought really reached the level of psychosis. So you saying psychosis was, I don't think it's hyperbole. It's not that everybody was psychotic, but there was again, I will just say, as I said, I think last time we spoke, which was, if you in 2015 told me that there was Nazis everywhere and there was a Russian operative in the White House, I would put you in the hospital, period. And that became just routine thinking in the middle of all this, amongst many other distorted thoughts that seem to be unable to process anything other than the delusions, the panic. So talk to me a little bit about mass formation psychosis, or mass formation, and how you think it fits as a construct fits what happened to us.
So I was the first American, to my knowledge, to use the phrase mass delusional psychosis back in summer of 2020. Now, that was a full year and a half before Dr. Peter McCullough and then Dr. Robert Malone went on Joe Rogan and blew up the internet and got him off, basically barely taken off of his site, using the term mass formation psychosis, which is actually redundant because the word formation means psychosis. And that term, mass formation, was coined by a man named Desmet, who's a Belgian psychologist. And he's now become very well known because he was interviewed as well on all of the major sites. I don't know if he ever got on Joe Rogan, but I know he was on Tucker Carlson just about a week ago for a full-hour interview. My belief, my opinion, is that the correct term is actually mass delusional psychosis, which was my term, because I think it explains things clearly without any redundancy. It means the following. It means a large group of people, i.e. American society, largely speaking, all at the same time, losing their common sense, losing their rationality, and falling victim to a false belief. And the false belief is that we're all going to die. That simply was never true. It wasn't true from the very beginning. And then to start acting in a way that is truly psychotic, walking around on foot, hiking outdoors with masks on, shutting down schools and businesses, refusing to greet people, refusing to shake hands. These are not healthy, sane behaviors. Like you said, Drew, if we would have seen this 5 years ago as doctors, we would have locked people up in the hospital for their own safety and well-being. But now this was not only acceptable, it was mandated, and it was virtuous. That is sick, that is a mental illness, and it is largely speaking a national one. And again, I spoke about this in summer of 2020, so 2 full years ago, more than 2 years ago. And then I wrote the book in November of 2021, which was a summation of all of my observations and thoughts for the previous 18 months, which was United States of Fear, How America Fell Victim to Mass Delusional Psychosis.
But we weren't the only ones. Most of the world fell victim to this. Am I overstating it? And that's, to me,
you're absolutely right.
Unbelievable to me.
I didn't write about that in my book last year because I wanted to keep the focus narrow enough so that people would not lose track of what I was saying. I didn't want the message to get diluted. And I'm also not an expert on the rest of the world. I am an expert on the United States, I believe, but not on the other 200 countries. I think it's fair to say, though, that largely speaking, the Western world got completely overrun with this mass delusional psychosis, specifically the Anglophone countries. Every single Anglophone country actually got infected by this fear pandemic the worst. New Zealand, Australia, Canada, England, and the United States. The most severe lockdowns in the world occurred in Canada and New Zealand, as well as arrests and forced quarantines, really like Nazi level stuff, pretty scary, minus the genocide at the end. But it also infected Asia. And I think there's different reasons for that. And I think the reason why it infected Asia is not because the Asians are generally more fearful than Westerners, but they are probably the most compliant culture in the world. So they will follow dictates, no matter how irrational, that come down from their government because they're very communal. Korea, Japan, not so much Hong Kong, certainly mainland China. They all believe that the greater good should prevail. So if they're told to sacrifice for the greater good, even if it doesn't make any obvious sense, they'll do it. So that explains the Western world and explains Asia. You look at some of the more third world countries, you look at the Middle East, you look at Africa, you look at the poorer countries in Central and South America, to a large degree, they didn't get overrun by this fear nearly as much as the countries I just mentioned. And I think a lot of it has to do with decentralization of power, cynicism towards government, reliance on family and church. The whole former Yugoslavia, for example, I spent 6 weeks there this past summer. I was in Macedonia, I was in Kosovo, and I was in Bosnia. For the most part, those countries never shut down. They didn't have mask requirements, or if they did, they were gone in a week. No quarantines, no Gestapo techniques, because the people there, they don't live in fear, and they don't live in fear of the government, and they're not compliant.
They also know what something real to be afraid of is. They just came through a huge war not that long ago.
Exactly. They know what a real threat is, so they can relatively understand the difference between an exaggerated threat and a immediate, true physical risk. They have the wherewithal to distinguish between the two. We don't, especially in the United States and in Western Europe. We have been coddled for the last generation. We're largely living in a virtual environment. We have almost no issues. Well, now we do because of the lack of police forces, but before that, very few physical violence risks or issues. We're comfortable. We have housing. There's a lot of cocooning that has been going on in the Western world, which I think has, I would say, softened or tenderized us to receive these messages of fear and take orders from government and corporate and media entities that, as you said earlier, really don't have the right to speak to us, don't have the right to give us orders or pronouncements, and we swallow them.
Nor the knowledge.
Fortunately,
nor the training or experience. They have no business.
Of course not.
Yeah.
They've overstepped their bounds tremendously from the very beginning. And yet they keep pinging us in our phones. You know, we pull these devices out of our phones every day. And what do we see for 2 years? We see Apple News, alert, flash, 2,000 more people dead of coronavirus, masking removed, thousands of people get infected. This is the first thing that they see every single day. And it comes through the media, which is largely just being driven by political and monetary agendas now, not through truth whatsoever. And so people get scared. I said last year, if every day we woke up and the first thing we saw or read about was the number of people that died in car accidents the previous day, at some point we would stop driving cars. This is very mechanized. It's very psychologically warfare driven. It's very sophisticated, and it's very successful.
Well, you've just enhanced, again, I get these little pieces of information that help me build this story a little better. And just now you've given me this piece about having a virtual threat, or, you know, when you've been coddled, the sense of a threat as opposed to a real threat when you've been through a war like Yugoslavia went through. And it is interesting as further evidence of that. What are you putting up there, Caleb?
They've found out how to monetize. So if you look on Twitter on the trending topics, it goes for you, trending, elections, news, sports, and they have its own tab just for COVID-19, and they've had that there for a while.
Of course,
just to highlight how much they want us to stay in fear.
but just to highlight for you a really interesting phenomena as it pertains to a real threat. When did you graduate medical school? If you don't mind me asking.
2007.
Okay, so you're a
2007.
I am.
Yeah.
So those of us that lived and worked in the AIDS epidemic had a I talked to many of my peers that were exactly my age and who had hundreds, if not thousands, of AIDS patients, and we all had the same exact attitude about this, which was, yeah, this is serious, but we worked with a disease that had 100% fatality, 100%, not 1%. 100%, and we didn't know where it was going to stop. That was a real threat. That was something, and we didn't lose our shit. We just did our job and kept doing what we needed to do, and we learned ways to help people adjust very powerful behaviors, their sexual behaviors, so they wouldn't become a victim of this 100% fatal illness. And that was a real threat. And by the way, when we tried to, personally, I tried to get everyone to calm down. I tried to get them to understand that we just went through the H1N1, which was a terrible illness, killed 300,000 people. You didn't even realize it happened. And this, now we killed, that was 300,000. This one killed a few million. The one you didn't know, the other you're still recovering from, and you shut down the entire world for. There is an intermediate way to react. There is a rational intermediate if you just use science, use what we're supposed to do clinical, isolate people that are at risk, isolate people that are sick, work for a vaccine. I mean, all the things we know how to do and have always done. We should have just done them. Testing, we screwed that one up. But there was things to have been done other than saying what we would say to a population when a nuclear warhead is headed your way, which is shelter in place, those words are the most disgusting to me of the entire pandemic.
I spoke with an internal medicine physician a year and a half ago who went through that AIDS crisis. He teaches, he sees patients in local hospitals, Cedars-Sinai here in Los Angeles. He treats hepatitis, he treats HIV, he treats bacteria, antibiotic treatment-resistant tuberculosis. Never once did I hear him say, whoa, I can't go see a patient because I might get infected with one of these diseases. Well, last year he said to me, I don't go to the hospital anymore. I don't do rounds. I don't see inpatients. And I said, why? He said, oh, I can't allow this disease to come home with me. It might affect my children. And I said, how many children, healthy children, have died of this virus that came from China? And he just stared at me blankly. He had no answer. I said, 0. Not a single healthy child has died. But he does not abide by that ethical duty as a physician. He has been terrorized by the fear as well. A physician who should know better, who risked his life and continues to save patients who are dying of diseases that we have no treatment for. And he would not go into the hospital to treat patients with severe colds and flu. For most, 99.997% of Americans, for those Americans, this was a severe flu. It just boggles my mind when I remember these kind of stories, and they're still happening today. People are still behaving in ways that are completely irrational.
So going back to the mass formation, I have learned, again, these little pieces I've sort of culled together, that our public health officials, particularly at the federal level, were making contact with their Chinese counterparts and were persuaded by them that zero COVID was a rational policy and the only policy, and a convenient and easy and surefire way to do it was to lock everything down. And there's email exchanges now available where these guys are going back and forth talking about what they've heard in China and how we have to do this, and they know what they're talking about. That was the first and really fatal error, is believing and not using their brain about what you do for a respiratory virus. A respiratory virus. This is not even a flu. It's a respiratory virus, and the fact that they were sort of persuaded, to me, I wonder what happened there, what that was, and how they could have fallen victim to that. But we're, I suppose, never going to know. And to be fair, fog of war, whatever, they were scared already and had a lot of responsibility. But then to go from being persuaded to clinging to that as the one and only policy, and then consciously using fear and panic, I've come to understand that they not only decided to use fear, somebody had showed us that they conducted sort of behaviorist sort of consults to decide how to scare people enough to push them into compliance. That part of this is biblically bad, in my opinion. That little piece of the story. Is that how you understand what happened?
I think, largely speaking, I would agree with you. I think for the first few weeks in March of 2020, you could chalk up, as you said, fog of war, overreaction, panic, error. We don't have enough data, that sort of problem. However, I believe very, very strongly now that within a matter of weeks, and I really mean this, within a matter of weeks, there was a opportunistic takeover by individuals, groups, and organizations who had nefarious plans to do ill for the community, for the country, in order to benefit themselves in terms of power and money and aggregation of all of those. And they set up a counteroffensive, a censorship campaign, a cancellation campaign, ad hominem attacks against people who were actually speaking up and questioning and providing actual evidence, real truth, to counter these narratives, and destroyed their lives. Many of them are friends and colleagues of mine. Some of them were actually put into jail and prison for this. Since then, they have continued this campaign of disinformation, misinformation, censorship against all evidence, against mountains and mountains now, 2.5 years of actual data to show that they were wrong from the beginning, never taking accountability, never apologizing, never saying they're sorry. That to me is proof positive that everything that happened in the last 2.5 years was not an error. It was thoughtful, it was decisive, it was planned, it was organized. It wasn't organized by all Americans. It was organized by a small number of Americans in positions of power who should have known better. But they used fear as a vehicle to gain compliance with the bulk of the United States, the bulk of Americans, who then fell victim to this. So I think most Americans were victimized by a small number of people who really did wrong to the rest of America with intent.
I understand the, as usual, it's follow the money, right? I mean, that's just the way things go.
Absolutely.
At these levels. But
who benefits?
I just want to take intent out of it, just because I don't have a confession. You know what I mean? I don't have hard evidence. And so I just prefer to look at the facts on the ground, which was that they used behavioral nudging to fear. They used fear systematically, and they succeeded. Whether they had good or bad intentions, it doesn't matter to me, because it's still all bad. What they did was bad, ill-advised, cannot happen again. We need to analyze it carefully so it doesn't happen again. And we need to really be honest about what happened, right? I mean, so people begin to wake up to what they've been through. Now part of Dr. Desmet's mass formation was social isolation, right? And he had a really interesting construct within his construct, which was that signaling virtue, signaling compliance with a particular group was a way to overcome some of that social isolation. And, let's just take mask wearing, wearing a mask outside below your nose. I mean, this is you can't get more bizarre and more meaningless than that. And yet the more irrational the behavior, his theory is the more they cling to it as a way of feeling that communal connection with the in-group. Do you agree with that?
I think that's true. I completely agree. I wrote about this recently in my Substack. And in addition to the addictive quality, I say, just like you reach into a cigarette to smoke to calm your anxiety, when you see people now outdoors, you put a mask on, you reach into your pocket and put a mask on your face to quell your anxiety about humans, about social contact. But it's more than that, because there's also this additional layer of feeling a sense, not just of relief from anxiety, but also a closeness and a bond with a community of people who are all doing what you're doing.
Right.
And especially after you've been locked at home for 2 years, you've been Zooming everything in. Naturally, people who are social creatures, human beings are social, they crave some sort of connection and belonging. And if all of that has been stripped away from them by force for 2 years, it's almost like sanding down a wood table. It's going to take whatever stain is poured on it. It's bare, it's raw. It just craves something to cover itself with. And so when you tell people, well, look, you've lost your community. You don't have AA anymore. You don't have clubs. Boy Scouts is gone. School is closed. Your job site is not reopened. But guess what? You can join people through an expression of your virtue and goodness by putting on a mask and gloves and standing 6 feet apart and using your elbows instead of your hands to shake and to say hello. And people say, thank goodness, now I have a meaning and a purpose I can fit in again. And they don't think, as you just said, and as Desmond often says, how crazy it is.
Yes, and the more he was saying that the more divorced it becomes from the evidentiary reality, the more they cling to it as a ritual way of signaling their participation. And so it becomes almost like a religious ritual, or wearing a certain kind of religious clothing that signifies your participation. It really is. Well, let's ask this crazy question: do we need religion more in this country? Is that part of why another reason we fell victim to all this?
It's almost a rhetorical question. Consistently, if you look at the communities in the U.S. and outside the U.S., as I mentioned, the former Balkans, Slovakia versus, say, Czechoslovakia, which went completely hog wild into lockdowns, masks, and forced vaccinations, whereas Slovakia didn't. Same people, same language. What's the difference between those two countries? The difference is Slovakia is still largely Catholic and they still practice Catholicism. Czechoslovakia is completely secular. There's no religion left in that country. So whether you are pro or anti-religion or a believer or an atheist, I don't care. Just look at, as you said, the facts on the ground. Look at the comparison case studies, North and South, just like North Korea, South Korea, freedom versus communism. What's the end result? Some people are eating dirt to live. Other people are selling refrigerators and cars to us through IG. So I think it's very clear to me that when you look at the one group in the United States that largely speaking resisted this pandemic of fear, this indoctrination, that one group is the evangelical Christian community. I think that says it all. And why is that? Because their focus is on family. Their focus is on church. It's on community. It's not an obeisance to a higher authority of the government. They obey God. That's what they would say. So they don't fall prey to this sort of fear. And there's a very strong, I would call it an inoculation or vaccination effect of religious community, really any community, but certainly the religious community, that largely speaking protected themselves from this kind of incursion because they were not stripped like that wooden table. They were not shaved down. They still had their meaning. They still had their community. So when the crazy, talisman carrying army came by and said, put this around your neck and rub it for good luck, they said, we don't need that. We already have a God. We don't need yours. Go home.
How did the Mormons do through this? I would imagine they would have, I don't know offhand, unless their leadership got deep into it, but it seemed like Utah did okay, didn't they?
My roommate in medical school is Mormon from Utah, and I speak with him frequently, and I'm pretty well versed in the Mormon community, and I still have a lot of friends in it. Largely speaking, the Mormon community did well. However, you're correct. Some of the leadership got infected with the fear virus, and they started to shut down some of the churches. I think their last leadership conference, which they do every year, last year was forced virtual by their own choice, not by the government. And they began in certain areas of Utah and also certain Mormon communities around the country, they began preaching this fear, staying home, wearing masks, and that was very disappointing. Now, it's not universal, so I'm not saying this was the official position of all the Mormon leadership, but it did appear that in certain areas, even in the national leadership in Utah, that eventually they succumbed as well. And there began to be factions and fissures in the community, people who were fearless and then those who were fear-mongering.
Dr. McDonald is with us. The book, let's put it up there, Caleb. We have to take a little break. I also, there we are. First Presidency urges Latter-day Saints to wear face masks. So there you go. So I want to take this little break here, and we'll keep going with Dr. McDonald. Caleb, I need your help on something. There's somebody named James that put up a super chat on the Restream, and it's off my page. I can't see it now.
Yes,
so I'd like
I
to
have it. I'll
track that down.
I'll send it to you. I'll put it back on screen. I think it might have been related to what you were just talking about nudging.
Okay, when we get back, we'll talk about that and more from Dr. McDonald. For a long time, I've been talking about the holy grail of skincare, Genucel, and the amazing results that both Susan and I have seen. I'm a big fan of Genucel's Silky Smooth XV. It's a moisturizer soaked right into my skin instantly, and with its immediate effects, I saw fine lines and wrinkles visibly disappear within 12 hours. Susan loves Genucel's vitamin C serum, infused with the purest vitamin C, absorbs to the deepest layer of the skin thanks to Genucel's proprietary skincare technology.
I am a snob when it comes to using products on my face. The dermatologist makes a ton of money from me. But when I was introduced to Genucel, I was so happy because it's so affordable and it works great. I was introduced to the Ultra Retinol Cream, which I love at night. All the eye creams are amazing. People notice my skin all the time, and I'm so excited because it's actually working.
And right now, Genucel has bundled my favorite products and Susan's for you to try today for up to 60% off retail pricing. That's right. Save up to 60% on my favorite Genucel products today. Just go to Genucel.com/Drew to see what's in our bundles and receive an extra 10% off at checkout when you enroll in their personal concierge at checkout. That again is Genucel.com/Drew, GENUCEL.com/DREW. And thank you guys.
Love
Susan.
that Genucel.
Yeah, you do.
Can you guys see the back, how beautiful the sky is behind
Oh
you
yeah,
today.
Not really. But it's nicely lit though.
that
behind
looks
me.
really nice.
Really pretty.
Susan, I need you to keep track of the super chats.
I will.
I'm not
Okay,
watching it.
sorry.
If I get it right, James' question was, what about the behavioral nudge units and campaigns informing governments and media to purposely scare people? Is that it, Caleb? Is that the question?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So let's bring Dr. Mark McDonald back in here. I am hearing about these units. I don't know. I'm forgetting the guy's name. That's the persuasion expert that wrote all the books on persuasion and persuasion. Do you remember who I'm talking about here?
I can only
Look
think
up
of Scott
persuasion,
Adams.
Caleb, and tell. No, I know, but this is a guy that's sort of above Scott. Persuasion is the name of his book, and and I keep hearing that they were using those kinds of technique. I don't know the extent of them, but it has come up a number of times that there were behavioral psychologists, behavioral units, the term nudge and nudging is brought up repeatedly, but some sort of conscious campaign on the part of the government was afoot to scare people into submission, and mission accomplished. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, the word nudge has been brought up frequently in a lot of the group conferences that I've gone to in the last year and a half. And I think it came from the book Nudge that was probably 15 or 20 years ago, which referred to the way that, say, product placement was used to encourage people to buy certain items at grocery stores. For example, placing something in eyesight versus at the bottom shelf. That's called a nudge. It's an economic nudge, and it was used in marketing.
Right.
And so a lot of the techniques that have been employed in the last few years to nudge behavior regarding medicine and schools and masks and shots really came out of economic need to sell more stuff. Obviously, money, as you said earlier, money drives a lot. People act in order to gain more money. So we have a trove of information on how to nudge behavior in order to sell products. Well, what if you use that concurrent with an opportunity, which is basically a deadly virus that hits our shores from China, and you put the two together? You could use a nudge, a sophisticated set of nudges through media, corporations, and politicians all working together to control the behavior of an entire population. That has never happened before, at least not to my knowledge. 330 million people, largely speaking, all behaving in the same way and to a large degree irrationally through nudging. And if nudging doesn't work, of course, you resort to force. You start to use coercive techniques like the Chinese government does, having children inform on their teachers, on their parents. And that's been going on too in the last couple of years. We had ambassador programs that were set up by the mayor here in LA, Eric Garcetti. The ambassador program was a way for you to call in and report businesses that were remaining open during the lockdown so that he could send in utilities workers to shut off the power and the gas. Now, these are more than nudges, but that's what you get if the nudges don't work. But the nudges were so successful, largely speaking, across the country that we didn't really need to resort to that. We just quietly pushed people in certain directions.
Well, had the nudges not been that effective, there's no way he could have used those draconian measures on the outliers, right? Because everybody would have been an outlier, and they would have had to come up with another way to gain compliance. And that's part of the astonishment of this whole thing, that it worked, that they got us all to comply with this. It was just sort of extraordinary. A lot of it was on a state by state basis, it seemed like, and it just seemed like the governors were trying to see who could be more over the top with their policies to prevent COVID, or they thought they were preventing COVID. It was just breathtaking to me. And Cialdini was the name of the guy I was trying to think of. His name is Cialdini, who is an expert who's been a sort of clearly consulting here and there. You see his stuff in his books, and there you can see the stuff afoot and some of the things the government is doing. But as a result of all this we've been through, I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that we really can't trust our information sources. It's hard to know what to trust, where to trust it. I'm having real trouble with that. How will we respond to that reality as we begin to wake up to this?
This is such an important question. I just discussed this last night at dinner with 4 physicians, all of whom said, look, the way that I'm talking now, it sounds like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not. I'm a very rational, common sense doctor who just wanted to do the right thing, follow information. And now I've been, basically I've been put into an outlier position. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, when I look at media now and what I'm reading, I can't differentiate between the truly insane nonsense conspiracy crap and reality, because it all comes together and sounds the same. And the reason for that is a lot of the stuff that was conspiratorial 3 years ago came to be true. It actually turned out to be real. So can you imagine the layperson trying to sift through all this information and figure out who to trust? There's no way to distinguish between truth and falsehood anymore. The only thing you can do, and this is what I tell people, stop trying to dissect the information if you don't have the expertise. This is what you do. If you want to figure out who to trust, you look backwards, not forwards. Look at the person who said something that sounded wacky 12 months ago. Did what he say turned out to be true, objectively accurate? If yes, look at what he said 9 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago. If everything that he said, no matter how insane it sounded at the time, turned out to be real and truthful, what he's saying today that sounds crazy is probably correct. And the opposite is also true. I think that's the best way to move forward, is to look backwards.
Well, and that's what my buddy Adam Carolla always says. Look at the batting average. Look at the batting average of CNN. Look at the batting average of the New York Times. Look at the batting average of Fox News. Look at all the journalistic outlets. Look at their batting average. I just saw an article today where he was addressing a statistical issue, but there were 4 opinions. It was an AP study. There were 4 opinions that only went one way, and they were from people that I don't even understand where the journalists drug these people up. I mean, they were sort of down the road people at the CDC and things, and it was clear they were just, the journalists got from these people what he or she wanted. I can't trust any journalist anymore. None of them. If a journalist wrote it, I'm out, because they either A, don't do the investigation, they just sort of parrot something they heard or something, something that's on social media, or they have a story in mind and aren't going for the truth. It's one or the other. It's nothing. They never seem to have any other way of presenting their journalistic material. It's either a story I'm proving or something I heard on the social media or somewhere. That's it. That's journalism today.
You're right. Adam is correct too. I just interviewed somebody a month ago who organized a talk I did at a church down in Orange County, and she was volunteered basically to work for free for a local paper, tasked with the responsibility of hiring journalists. And she said, this should be easy. We just have, she's a writing teacher. She said, I can help them improve their writing. He said, oh, you don't know how difficult it is. After 3 months, this is what she learned. She learned not only that people can't write, but she also learned that the people that wanted to be journalists saw journalism. These are young people just starting out, teens, early 20s. Their view of journalism was the following. We're told, or we decide on an outcome, a position, an ideology, and then we go backwards and we find information and people to support that conclusion, and then we write our article. They said that completely
that's what
in seriousness.
That's fine. Good.
Yeah, that was it.
Well, that's it. Look, mission accomplished. And now we don't want to listen to you. so I mean, it is. It's just exactly what I think I'm seeing. So, okay, I agree with you. That's what you're doing. Now I need a new source of information, and it's not you. That's it. We're there.
That's right.
We're there. We're truly there. It's too much. I have enough trouble trying to, even medical opinioning, like, what's happened to our peers. I saw the strangest thing the other day. I was, I'm deep in many years in the American College of Physicians. I have profound respect for them. It's one of my valued positions. And I went to a little symposium they put on, and they were talking about, vaccine safety. And to a person, these were infectious disease experts, these are professors of medicine. 4 of them opened with, well, as a mom, I got my kids vaccinated. I mean, I don't give a, why is that even discussed here? I want you to tell me about your impression as a professor of infectious disease. I want you to present the data to me. Every single one. I'm a dad and I got 3 kids, my kids. Why did that come out of their mouth? That was another sentinel moment for me. It should not matter what you personally have done. What should matter is what is your opinion as your role as a professor, and then show me and defend it so I can assimilate that data. No, as a dad, I had his dad, my kids are vaccinated. There we go. That's it. What has happened to us? It's just astonishing. And that we don't,
Drew,
people don't see it happening is even the more astonishing thing.
They don't get it. I have withdrawn my membership of every single professional organ that I belong to. The AMA, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, California Medical Association. I mean, the California Medical Association, which is supposed to represent doctors and further their interests. You could call it a union if you want. I mean, it's a club. You're supposed to be helping doctors. That's your core mission statement. They formally took a position just last week or 2 weeks ago to support Assembly Bill 2098, which passed the California State Legislature a few weeks ago, 30 days ago, called the Medical Misinformation Bill, which will legislate the censorship of the speech of physicians. And this is the private California Medical Association that says, you know what, we think it's a great idea to have doctors silenced and be intimidated in speaking their voice scientifically, even if they're wrong, because we think that the greater good, which is to protect the state of Sacramento and the political establishment, is what we're going to be batting for now. How is that a doctor's organization? That is just another political arm of Sacramento. It's disgusting.
I actually spoke to the president of the Board of Medical Quality Assurance in California, and she was quite reasonable, and I appreciated her call. We spent 45 minutes or so on the phone. She's a lawyer. Her dad was an internist. And I felt reassured talking to her that this was not going to be abused. However, I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat thinking, what happens when the next one comes in? Who's the next president going to be? And what might they do with this? He or she do with it? God only knows, because this creates vast sweeping powers for the board to encumber doctors' licenses for speaking other than the standard of care. And you and I have both been in practice long enough to know the standard of care is frequently wrong, frequently needs to be pushed back on, frequently needs to be changed, and frequently harms patients. There we are. We're stuck with this.
I believe that medicine today has completely lost its way. I don't trust the journals. I don't trust the medical organizations. I don't trust a lot of my colleagues anymore, because they're no longer basing their value system on what is true and fighting to achieve truth through rough, gruff critique, argumentation, and debate. They are simply accepting a line that's being given to them by, like, for example, as you said earlier, the New York Times, the political establishment, people who have an axe to grind, people who have a source of benefit, and then they're intimidating everyone around them to follow that line. I know many very well-established, well-published doctors who can no longer get their publications printed and peer-reviewed in The Lancet, in JAMA, in Signet, because their conclusion that they reached through their research does not conform with the pre-approved conclusion. I don't know where you go here. I mean, if we have to dismantle all of our established institutions and start from scratch, that's going to be a lot of work. But the lay public does not and should not trust what they're being told anymore, because they're being lied to.
Well, you've gone further than I have. I am not that far gone. I must tell you, I still have peers I trust. I still value greatly some of my professional societies and their publications. There are issues. Like I said, I spoke to Dr. Harry Reish, who has concerns with generally even the power of the best randomized controlled studies, that we're not powering them enough in terms of outcome numbers. And I want to bring it back and discuss that in more detail. But I do believe I still read medical journals a lot and carefully, and I do feel like I get something out of them. I do believe also, though, journals like even the New England Journal are filled with fluff many times and things that they're just a waste of time and space, but okay, they're doing that thing, whatever it is they think they're doing. But here, I want you to give me a consult. So you're going to do a psychiatric consult on me. what's wrong with me? What might I be? No, it's not. I'm not going to go all the way. But what might?
Ooh, this could be good.
No, I kind of know what's wrong with me that way. It's sort of formally diagnostically. Well, I'll tell you, I have a generalized anxiety disorder. I'll tell you what I've got. I've got generalized anxiety disorder. I had years of therapy. Whatever characterological stuff I had was sort of, some trauma from narcissistic parenting, usual stuff, but largely worked through. And I had a mood disturbance. I am prone to depression. So those are my major headline psychiatric stuff. And I'm hypertensive and hypercholesterolemic. I have metabolic syndrome, and I'm on meds for that. None of them seem to be affecting any of my psychiatric things. But my question is, how do I know that I'm not missing something? I worry that you talked about this prevailing wind that many of our peers are swept into. How do I know that I'm not the wrong one? How do I challenge myself to make sure that, you know what I'm saying? I really want to be objective as possible. And I talk to somebody like you and I get kind of upset and excited about this because it's the way I see it too. But I want to always step back and be humble. I think hubris has been the enemy in this entire story. It's been the hubristic. When I was hubristic, I got into trouble, but it was the hubris of the people that did this to us that really caused the harm. I don't want to be hubristic. I want to be humble, and I want to make sure that I'm not missing something. There's not something about the orientation I have that is causing me to see this a certain way, and that there's not something of a greater good perhaps being acted out here, or our peers are on to something. Let's even just take 2098. The Bumquo already has the authority to encumber us for telling patients things that can hurt them, which is really what they say this law is. I'm worried that it's going to be used for much, much more. Is my fear of overreach and my fear of the excesses of the public health community, which is really what we've been talking about this whole time. Am I wrong? Is there a justification for these excesses? It's just how it should be to protect patients, and I'm too personally involved in this to see it? I'll leave it at that.
This is the way I would answer that question. I think it's a very fair and good question. And sometimes there have been days where I wake up in the morning and I say for a few seconds to myself, am I the crazy one? Because I'm surrounded by crazy people. I've said that I walk outside my house in the morning and it feels to me like I'm in a giant outdoor insane asylum, a locked ward, like where I did my psychiatric residency training.
No, I see Mark, I keep saying I am through. Yeah, Mark, I keep saying I am Alice in Wonderland. I'm through the looking glass. I don't understand what's happening here. So many things are literally in the upside down right now. And maybe every old person that's a professional starts to feel that way at a certain point. You know what I mean? Is this just a generational thing that everyone has to go through? I just happen to have a electronic media that I get to talk about it publicly, and there's no record of previous generations of doctors feeling like this? Or go ahead, keep going. The upside down.
It's very clear. I mean, things are literally upside down. You're seeing the changes of language, for example. Let's take a very basic one. The Merriam-Webster dictionary in July redefined the word male, which used to talk about sexual organs and gametes and, biology, right? Now, if you look up mw.com and you type in male, you get the following definition. I'm somewhat paraphrasing. To hold a gender identity opposite to that of female. That's the new definition of male. Now,
okay. All right.
That to me does not sound like a biological objective definition. That sounds rather political to me. So the thing that I always ask people when they're trying to decide, am I crazy? Are they crazy? Am I just overreacting? Am I, an older generation? I understand that's a good question. You should be asking that question every day just to check yourself. This is what I tell people. Ask yourself if that change, if that question that you're asking, if that proposal that you've been given to agree with and to further, if it does one of two things. Does it further the cause of independence or the cause of dependency? And if it's dependency, it's probably a bad idea. That's a very simple, universal way of looking at whether something is going to have a good or a bad outcome. Because most, if not all, of the problems that we've seen in the last 3 years have come from an increase in dependency of the individual on someone or something else, on a group, on an agency, on a state, on a larger human power. as soon as you have consolidation of power, you have almost like not just an opportunity, but an inevitability of wrongdoing, of corruption. Like the old phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. As we give more power away from our spouses, our children, our communities, our churches, our civic organizations, our school boards, et cetera, to higher and higher agency powers, things start to go wrong. I mean, great example of this is one woman who's not a real doctor. She has a degree in social work named Barbara Farrar, who was appointed, not elected, by the LA County Board of Supervisors to make and
That's
dictate.
the F word for me.
For me as well. 9 million people in LA County are being told whether they can leave their homes or eat in a restaurant or stand up or sit down or have their children go to school or play basketball without a mask on in a public park by one woman who, in my opinion, is actually not very bright. She's not a physician. She has no clinical experience, and she's making these decisions as an unelected official. That is a consolidation of power. And again, the word dependency on her that has led to a horrific, catastrophic failing of mental and physical health in this county and this city. That's one concrete example of the application of what I just said. So if Barbara Farrar says, depend on me, you might want to say, you know what, I don't know her. I don't know if she's right or wrong, but I don't like that order. I'm going to go against it. I'm going to make decisions for myself. I'm going to ask my family what's right, my community, my church. I think you're much more likely to have a just and good outcome if you take that track. Otherwise, you can just go through this chronic mental masturbation of asking yourself these questions every day. Am I wrong? Am I crazy? Maybe they're right. Maybe you're never going to get an answer to that. Just take it back to simple stuff. Very, very simple. Occam's razor. Is it going to help me become more independent or more dependent? And you'll get the right answer almost every time.
You know what's funny is the board of directors wanted her out as well in the
LA County Board of Supervisors.
Oh my God, they
were not all.
They were having the problems.
It was sort of 3-2. That's the problem.
Yeah, that was the problem. We needed one more.
4 and 2 were against.
Yeah, but
you needed one more.
My son said something really funny. He was studying psychology at the time, right at the beginning, and he was like, "Why are we letting somebody with a mental health problem give us mental health advice? Like, how are they?"
That's one thing. Somebody didn't have active mental health problem is really what he was talking about. But I want to correct a couple things that you said. I don't even think she has a social work degree per se. She was trained in sociology. And here's my observation. That's again one of the little insights I've garnered through talking to people like you, is that the public health community, the people who have been trained in public health, are no longer trained in medicine or health. They're trained in equity distribution, not of resources, equity of outcome. So it's not even how do we get all the resources equitably distributed, how do we get equity of outcome? And if you're looking for equity of outcome in a pandemic, I mean, do that math in your head for a second. Equity of outcome in a pandemic, that's insane. That's insane. That's an insane notion. It's an insane motivation, and that's insane. So you have somebody not trained in medicine with an insane motivation, and guess what? Harmed more than any other county, probably other than San Francisco in the country, maybe in the world.
Yeah.
And same outcome, exactly same outcome as Florida, which had no lockdown. Exact same outcome. So, I kept, during the darkest hours, for some reason, for me, the business is around Disneyland sort of represented what was happening. I felt so bad for them. I was thinking, look, Florida's open, at least on a limited basis, open Disneyland, so these businesses can start to open a little bit, and then these families can feed their family and get these workers back in. No. But the other thing is, in terms of the independency thing, there's been you've called it consolidation, but I saw something even more specific, at least again, as it pertains to our profession, is centralization. There's, doctors are employees now. There's centralized authority. And I feel like centralization and bureaucracy and then dependent on those things is the enemy of sanity, of good health, of a good life.
What you're describing, Drew, the end result of that centralization is a destruction and elimination of the marketplace of ideas, of sort of capitalism in the intellectual sense. And this is why the censorship when you have a sort of collective consolidation of power is so egregious and so damaging. Because when everything is under one umbrella, one person pulls all the strings of what you see and hear all day long. If you can eliminate that marketplace of ideas by selectively just muting a certain point of view, now you have tremendous power and control that will most likely be used for bad. Even if the intention is good at the beginning, it's just too easy to get corrupted. So I completely agree with that. Consolidation and centralization of any form of power always inevitably leads to corruption and wrongdoing.
Well, and the thing I don't understand is there's never been a more effective unit than a well-trained physician and an informed, motivated patient. And that physician has to be, in his or her heart have proper intent in the practice of medicine and all those ethical guidelines, and be concerned for the well-being of the patient just and only. That's it. That's your best unit. And anything you do on top of that unit adulterates it, makes it less efficient, screws it up. And I don't understand why that's not in every physician's consciousness right now, a concern about that. And it doesn't seem to be.
Kaiser is probably the biggest, most well-known corporate employer of physicians in the country. And I know a lot of Kaiser physicians, and every single one of them has said to me the same thing. It was really sad, actually, when I talked to one recently. He was actually injured as an employee at Kaiser. And this is just, it's almost difficult to talk about. He refused to receive one of these mRNA injections for religious reasons. He's an immigrant from Honduras, actually. And he was working on the ICU ward for these patients that were very, very ill and dying. And he contracted the virus while working. And he was sent home. He went to the ICU, the same unit, the same ward, where these patients were those that he was actually working with and treating. And they told him to lie in this bed in the ICU. They gave him Tylenol and oral hydration. And after 2 or 3 days, they said, just go home. There's nothing we can do for you. He went home and he just sat there and sweated it out for 3 or 4 or 5 days. And then when he wanted to go back to work, he was told that they wouldn't allow him to return to work because he was now disabled, because he had some respiratory compromise. And he's now had to quit his job. He's had to leave. He had to file a workers' comp claim because he can no longer work for the Kaiser institution because he was employed by them. And no one else will hire him because now he's considered to be damaged goods. So there is this problem that I see with the corporatization of medicine, taking people into employment status as opposed to doctor-patient status, which is the strongest one that you had, independent physicians, and then coercing and scaring employees into following dictates from on high that are not benefiting the patients. They become automatons, they follow algorithms, and if they don't toe the line, they get canned. I think this is really harming the medicine field, it's harming the patients, and it's also really disappearing the marketplace. It's not allowing good ideas and good medicine to rise to the top because one person is pulling all the strings. I don't like it, and I don't think it's good for us.
Well, I hope you will contemplate restoring your faith in our peers a little bit. I understand your desire not to be a part of the formal organizations and the clubs and all that stuff. I've never found them to be, other than the highest level professional societies, the CMAs and the AMAs, they've never done anything for me ever that I can see. And now they seem to be working against us. So I understand not being a part of that. But I hope you'll sort of regain some optimism that this is our peers are a well-trained group of people. They're well-meaning. Some of the best people I've ever met in a sort of, never have I found a group so uniformly interested in just doing what's right for other people. And some very often to the detriment of themselves. They often will sacrifice themselves, oftentimes. And maybe we're losing some of that. I don't know. Maybe, this, again, the centralization has washed out some of that, what we used to see. But I hope you can have some, let my words ring in your head a little bit to restore some nidus of faith that you can maybe allow to grow if we start seeing some good start to come back in the profession.
I still trust 20% of them. I've only eliminated 80%.
Okay, maybe it can grow. And Personally, I will continue to try to be, cautious and non-hubristic and, contemplate where I might be wrong. But I don't know. It seems like this conversation we had today was sort of matter of fact to me, given what has happened. I don't know if you did much inpatient psychiatry, but I spent 35 years working in a psychiatric hospital alongside of doing general medicine at a medical facility. And it informed me. It changed how I think about, it helped me understand how people click. And even with that experience, this whole pandemic has been just one head-shaking mystery after another that I'm only now just trying to put together. And I do think that somehow this mass formation phenomenon is a big piece of the story.
I really do believe that if we were to look at this from a psychological perspective, it would really help to clarify things. The ideas and the concepts that we've been bringing up and that I write about that have to do with narcissism and fear and compliance and control and the ease with which good people can be compelled to do very irrational and self-destructive things. This is not restricted to mass enclosures and forced injections. This is life. This is about what's going on in our day-to-day world on all forms of public policy. It informs the whole debate about transgender, cross-sex hormone and surgical mutilation procedures. It informs whether we decide to move from coal to electricity. It determines whether we are going to print more money and devalue our currency or allow people to be more productive and actually increase the strength of the dollar through making more things rather than sending out more checks. There's a lot of issues that are really important that are going to continue to be important. And if we don't understand the psychology behind what we're being told and how we're reacting, if we just respond emotionally in a state of panic and fear and sort of addictive reactivity, I really don't think that we can continue to grow and evolve and resolve these problems. This is not a policy debate. I don't talk to people like you to argue policy or discuss necessarily medicine and politics. I'm really here to argue for a better way of thinking and a better way of being self-aware and improving mental and psychological well-being, because then I think if we all do that, then I think the policy debates and problems will largely take care of themselves.
And that brings us back to the book. And, there's a lot more we could say on everything you've just packed into those closing statements. Freedom from Fear is the book. It's a 12-step approach. But I do believe that all roads lead to narcissism. In fact, I did write a book about narcissism 12 years ago, and I wanted to write a chapter about other periods of history where childhood trauma and, overt childhood trauma, physical and sexual abuse, and narcissism were so prevalent. And my prime example was pre-revolutionary France. And I was predicting guillotines. I didn't know anything about cancellation and social media. That didn't exist yet. But I was absolutely right about the behavior of mobs as it pertains to narcissism and scapegoating. And that's also been a piece of the story here. The part that I didn't know is the malleability that, the mob gets, if the people with a certain persuasive power gets a hold of the mob. I guess I should know that. I mean, that's always what's happened. So back to your point about being this, not this being about life, this has happened before. This is about human history and human behavior in large societies. We've done this before, and we need to be honest about that and raise awareness about how we can avoid making the mistakes of the past.
Yes, completely agree.
We will leave it at that. Again, the book, Freedom from Fear. Yeah. Tell me, narcissism. Finish with that. I love it. Tell me. Narcissism, huge. Yes. Yeah, huge.
Narcissism is
another
failure
podcast.
In a nutshell. It's a failure of the child who believes in order to survive that he is the center of the universe. And that's how he survives, because he's little and he's defenseless. It's the failure of him to give that up and realize how relatively insignificant he is as an adult and how important the people around him are relative to himself. And when that fails, that's when you get adult narcissism, and that develops in all these bad roads that we've been talking about.
Oh, there's my old narcissism book, The Mirror Effect. But a way out is with a. I mean, look. It's the only time I see narcissism get significantly better is when people are recovering from addiction. So 12-step to me has always been a way that if people are motivated with it, that they can improve, they can get better. All right, Dr.
Whole
Martin
chapter set up
thank
just
you so
about that
much.
in the book.
All right, then we have to read that. Is the website up there? Yes. Let's see. I'm trying to read it. Caleb, his website for
dissidentmd.com.
It's dissidentmd.com. That's right. That's the website. All
That's
right.
right.
Well, hopefully we can shake hands and meet in the flesh one of these days soon. I'd appreciate that.
I would enjoy that. That would be great. It was a really nice time talking to you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for coming back. We appreciate it. And for the rest of you, we will be back on Wednesday, Susan. Is that correct? I think we're traveling again a bit. Back on Wednesday with Jay Bhattacharya, who is the poster child for all of this. He is the one, if you want to point at the excesses, and right? Am I right? That somebody that did not deserve what he got, who's just a sensible professional. Yeah,
Great guy.
Yeah. A great guy. He is the poster child for the excesses of the pandemic, and we'll be talking to him. Dr. Kelly Victory will be in here.
Click on your alarms on whatever platform you're watching on.
Yes, please. And on Thursday, I'm going to bring in one of my, just going to be a very quick interview with one of my staff members from the desert, from the special ops show I did. Rami Adeleke.
What day is that? Thursday?
That's Thursday.
Oh no, I'm gonna have a tooth pulled.
Oh, you're not going to get to see it. Well, he's just promoting a little film he put together about human trafficking. Interesting enough. So we're going to talk about that.
I think I'll turn the lights on. I'll probably go back to bed.
All right, fair enough. And that'll be next week. So we'll see you all then. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. Phimosis, see that one down the lower left there. See the foreskin comes narrowed. That's it, and the penis can't get out. And it tears and it bleeds and, and it hurts, and you have to get a circumcision to repair it. So any urologist can do it lickety split.
Oh,
yeah.
Why'd you have to say lickety split like that? That made it weird.
It's not weird. So what's your question?